The rain hammered against the cobblestones of Parliament Square as Marcus Thompson stumbled out of the Red Lion pub, his vision blurred and his words slurring together like melted chocolate. At 32 years old, Marcus had once been the pride of his working-class family from Manchester, but tonight he was just another drunk tourist making poor decisions in London's heart. The alcohol coursed through his veins like liquid courage, making him feel invincible and foolishly brave. He had been celebrating the completion of a major construction project, something that should have been a moment of pride and accomplishment. Instead, it had become an excuse to drown his recent failures in whiskey and bitter ale. Marcus worked as a site foreman for a mid-sized construction company, a job he had fought hard to earn after years of manual labor and night school. But, lately, everything seemed to be falling apart. His girlfriend Sarah had left him 3 weeks ago, taking their shared dreams of marriage and a house in the suburbs with her. His mother was battling cancer, and the medical bills were crushing his family's finances. The promotion he had been promised for 2 years kept getting delayed, while younger, more connected colleagues seemed to advance effortlessly around him. Tonight was supposed to be different. Tonight was supposed to be about celebrating the successful completion of the Canary Wharf residential complex, a project that had taken 18 months and represented the biggest achievement of his career. But even that victory felt hollow when he had no one special to share it with. The London streets stretched before him like a maze of possibilities and regrets. Marcus had always been fascinated by British history and tradition, something his ex-girlfriend had found endearing until it became obsessive. He could recite facts about every monarch, every royal residence, every ceremonial tradition that made Britain unique. But knowledge and respect were two different things, and alcohol had a way of erasing the boundaries between them. As he wandered through the tourist-heavy areas near Westminster, Marcus's attention was drawn to the imposing gates of Buckingham Palace. Even at this late hour, the iconic building stood majestically against the night sky, its windows glowing like golden eyes watching over the sleeping city. The sight should have filled him with the same awe he had felt as a child during his first school trip to London, but tonight it only reminded him of everything he felt he could never achieve. The Queen's Guard stood at their posts with the same unwavering discipline they had maintained for centuries. These were not mere tourist attractions, though many visitors treated them as such. They were active duty soldiers, highly trained members of the British Army's elite regiments, chosen for their exceptional service and unwavering dedication to duty. Each guard had undergone months of intensive training, not just in military procedures but in the self-control required to maintain their posts despite constant provocation from ignorant tourists. Marcus approached the gates with the swagger of someone who had lost touch with reality. The combination of alcohol, personal pain, and a lifetime of feeling overlooked had created a dangerous cocktail of resentment and false bravado. He looked at the motionless guards and saw not dedicated soldiers but symbols of a system that had never given him a fair chance. The guard closest to Marcus was Lance Corporal James Mitchell, a 24-year-old from Cardiff who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan before being selected for ceremonial duties. Mitchell stood 6 feet tall in his iconic red tunic and bearskin hat, his rifle held at the perfect angle, his eyes focused straight ahead despite the chaos of tourists and late-night revelers around him. He had been on duty for 3 hours and had 2 more to go before the next changing of the guard. Mitchell had seen it all during his months at Buckingham Palace. Tourists who tried to make the guards laugh, children who tugged at their uniforms, teenagers who posed inappropriately for social media photos. But there was something different about the drunk man approaching his position, something that made Mitchell's training kick into high alert even as he maintained his ceremonial stillness. Marcus stopped directly in front of Mitchell, swaying slightly as he tried to focus his alcohol-clouded vision. The guard's stoic expression and perfect posture seemed to mock everything Marcus felt he was lacking in his own life. Here was someone with purpose, with respect, with a role that mattered in the world. Marcus saw his own failures reflected in Mitchell's unwavering discipline. "Look at you," Marcus slurred, his voice carrying across the quiet square. "Standing there like you're so bloody important. Like you matter more than the rest of us." Mitchell's training had prepared him for this moment. The guards were instructed to ignore verbal provocations, to maintain their positions regardless of what tourists said or did, within reason. But there was something in Marcus's tone that suggested this encounter would not end with simple mockery. The few other people in the area began to notice the confrontation. A young couple from Germany paused their late-night stroll to watch, their phones already emerging from their pockets. A group of university students from nearby Westminster University stopped their conversation to observe what was unfolding. In the age of social media, every public moment was potentially viral content, and the tension between the drunk man and the stoic guard was exactly the kind of drama that captured online attention. Marcus took another step closer, his breath visible in the cold night air as he continued his drunken monologue. "Must be nice, having a job where all you do is stand around looking pretty. Real men work for a living, mate. Real men build things, create things that matter." The irony was lost on Marcus that he was addressing one of Britain's elite soldiers, someone who had risked his life in active combat zones while Marcus had never faced anything more dangerous than a construction site accident. But alcohol and pain had a way of distorting reality, making the inebriated see enemies where none existed. Mitchell remained perfectly still, but his fellow guards were now alert to the situation. The palace security systems were also monitoring the interaction, ready to intervene if the situation escalated beyond what ceremonial protocol could handle. But, for now, this was exactly the kind of test that separated true Queen's Guards from ordinary soldiers. Marcus's voice grew louder and more aggressive as his emotional pain found expression in misdirected anger. "You think you're special because you wear that fancy uniform? Because you got picked to play dress up for the tourists? I've built towers that will outlast whatever meaningless tradition you represent." The words echoed across the square, reaching the ears of everyone within 100 yards. Several people had now begun recording the encounter, their phones capturing every word of Marcus's increasingly hostile rant. Social media algorithms would soon amplify this moment far beyond its original audience, but neither Marcus nor Mitchell could have predicted the global attention this confrontation would eventually receive. Sarah Chen, a journalism student at King's College London, was among those who began documenting the scene. She had been walking home from a study session when she noticed the crowd gathering around the palace gates. Her journalistic instincts told her this was more than just another drunk tourist making a scene, and she began taking notes even as she recorded video. Marcus's personal pain continued to spill out in the form of increasingly inappropriate comments about the guards, the monarchy, and the British class system that he felt had held him back throughout his life. He spoke of his ex-girlfriend's criticism that he would never amount to anything significant, his mother's disappointment that he had not pursued university education, his father's death 3 years earlier from a heart attack brought on by financial stress. But none of these personal struggles justified what came next. In a moment of alcohol-fueled stupidity that would haunt him for years to come, Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a half-eaten sandwich from the pub. Without thinking about the consequences, he hurled the food directly at Lance Corporal Mitchell's immaculate uniform. The sandwich struck Mitchell's red tunic and fell to the ground, leaving visible stains on the pristine fabric that represented centuries of military tradition and honor. The collective gasp from the gathered crowd was audible even over the distant traffic noise. Several people immediately began uploading their videos to various social media platforms, adding hashtags that would soon trend worldwide. Mitchell's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he maintained his position and composure with the discipline that had been drilled into him through months of training. However, the rules of engagement had now changed. Physical interference with the Queen's Guard and their uniform was not something that protocol required them to endure in silence. The palace security team immediately began moving toward the scene, their communication devices crackling with coordinated responses. Metropolitan police officers who patrolled the area were also converging on the gates, their presence adding an official weight to what had begun as a simple case of public drunkenness. Marcus seemed to realize in that moment that he had crossed a line he could never uncross. The alcohol's false confidence began to evaporate as he saw the serious faces of the approaching security personnel and the dozens of phones pointed in his direction. The reality of his actions started to penetrate through the haze of whiskey and pain. But it was too late. The videos were already uploading, the story was already being shared across platforms, and the consequences of his moment of disrespectful stupidity were about to unfold in ways he could never have imagined. Marcus Thompson, a working-class foreman from Manchester who had simply wanted to celebrate a professional achievement, was about to become the center of an international discussion about respect, tradition, and the price of letting personal pain drive public behavior. The guards maintained their positions as security moved in to handle the situation, their discipline unshaken even as they had witnessed an unprecedented breach of the respect their service deserved. Lance Corporal Mitchell would later reflect on this moment as a test of everything he had been trained to embody, a reminder that true strength often lay in restraint rather than retaliation. As the first security officer reached Marcus's position, the construction foreman finally understood that his life was about to change in ways he had never anticipated. The celebration that was supposed to mark his greatest professional triumph had instead become the beginning of a very different kind of story, one that would teach him lessons about respect, consequence, and redemption that no amount of alcohol could wash away. The Metropolitan Police Constable who reached Marcus first was PC Emma Rodriguez, a 5-year veteran who had seen her share of drunk and disorderly tourists around London's major landmarks. But the gravity in her supervisor's voice over the radio told her this incident was already being treated differently than a typical public intoxication case. The presence of multiple cameras and the direct assault on a Queen's Guard had elevated what might have been a simple citation into something much more serious. "Sir, I need you to step away from the guard and place your hands where I can see them," Rodriguez commanded with the calm authority that came from years of dealing with intoxicated individuals. Her body-worn camera was already recording everything, adding to the growing digital record of Marcus's worst night. Marcus looked around with the confused awareness of someone suddenly realizing they were the center of unwanted attention. The crowd had grown larger, with people stopping their evening walks to witness what was clearly becoming a significant incident. The palace security team had cordoned off the immediate area, and additional Metropolitan Police units were arriving with their blue lights cutting through the London night. "I didn't mean, it was just a sandwich," Marcus mumbled, his words still slurred but carrying a note of dawning comprehension. The alcohol that had given him false courage now seemed to amplify his growing panic as the reality of his situation became clearer with each passing moment. Detective Inspector Sarah Whitmore arrived on scene within minutes of the initial call. As the senior investigating officer for incidents involving royal properties, she had been automatically notified when the situation escalated beyond a simple disturbance. Whitmore was known throughout the Metropolitan Police for her thorough investigations and her particular expertise in cases that involved public order offenses near royal residences. "What's the situation, Constable Rodriguez?" Whitmore asked as she surveyed the scene, noting the positions of the guards, the gathered crowd, and the obvious signs of alcohol impairment in the subject. "Male suspect appears heavily intoxicated, threw food at Lance Corporal Mitchell's uniform," Rodriguez reported. "Multiple witnesses, extensive video evidence from bystanders." The guard maintained his position throughout the incident. Whitmore nodded as she observed Marcus, who was now swaying more noticeably as the adrenaline began to wear off and the full effects of his evening's drinking became more apparent. She had handled hundreds of cases involving disrespectful behavior toward the guards, but physical interference with their uniforms was relatively rare and always treated seriously by the courts. Meanwhile, the videos of Marcus's confrontation were already spreading across social media platforms at viral speed. Sarah Chen, the journalism student who had witnessed the entire incident, had uploaded her footage to Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram simultaneously, using hashtags like #RoyalGuardDisrespect, #Buckingham Palace, and #DrunkTourist that immediately began trending in London and spreading internationally. The video quality was remarkably clear, capturing not only Marcus's aggressive approach and verbal abuse but also the moment when he threw the sandwich and the professional restraint shown by Lance Corporal Mitchell. Within an hour, the footage had been shared thousands of times, with comments ranging from outrage at Marcus's behavior to praise for the guard's discipline under pressure. Marcus was formally arrested on charges of drunk and disorderly conduct, assault on a member of Her Majesty's Armed Forces, and criminal damage to military property. As Rodriguez read him his rights, Marcus's confusion was evident. The legal terminology seemed foreign and frightening, especially through the fog of alcohol that still clouded his judgment. "I want to call my mum," Marcus said quietly as the handcuffs were applied, a statement that revealed how completely unprepared he was for the consequences of his actions. The request struck Rodriguez as both pathetic and heartbreaking, reminding her that even adults could find themselves in situations that reduced them to children seeking comfort from their parents. The journey to the police station gave Marcus his first real opportunity to contemplate what had happened. Sitting in the back of the police vehicle, watching the familiar London landmarks pass by through windows that he could not open, he began to understand that this night would not end with a simple sobering up and a cautionary tale to share with friends. At Belgravia police station, Marcus underwent the standard booking process for someone arrested on serious charges. His personal effects were catalogued, including his mobile phone, which had been buzzing constantly with notifications that he was not allowed to check. His construction company identification card and his driver's license seemed to mock him with their official photographs showing a confident, professional man who bore little resemblance to the disheveled suspect he had become. The desk sergeant, Robert Murphy, was a 20-year veteran who had processed thousands of arrests but still found himself occasionally surprised by the circumstances that brought people into custody. Marcus's case was particularly striking because his background check revealed no prior criminal history, steady employment, and community ties that suggested this incident was completely out of character. "First time in custody, Mr. Thompson?" Murphy asked as he completed the booking paperwork, his tone professional but not unkind. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, the formal address coming naturally despite his impaired state. The reality of his situation was beginning to penetrate through the alcohol, bringing with it a crushing sense of shame and regret that would only intensify as the night progressed. Back at Buckingham Palace, Lance Corporal Mitchell had been relieved from his post for the evening so that his uniform could be properly cleaned and documented as evidence. The sandwich remnants had left visible stains on the ceremonial red tunic that represented not just military tradition but also the personal pride that each guard took in maintaining the highest standards of appearance. Mitchell's commanding officer, Major Patricia Davies, conducted a preliminary interview to ensure that the guard had not been physically harmed and to document the incident from his perspective. Davies was impressed but not surprised by Mitchell's professional handling of the situation, as it represented exactly the kind of composure that made the Queen's Guard selection process so rigorous. "How are you feeling about what happened tonight, Lance Corporal?" Davies asked, her concern genuine despite the formal military setting. "Disappointed in the individual's behavior, ma'am, but proud of the training that helped me maintain my post," Mitchell replied. "I understand that some people don't fully appreciate what we represent, but that doesn't change our duty to uphold the standards expected of us." Davies nodded approvingly. Mitchell's response demonstrated exactly the kind of maturity and perspective that made him an exemplary member of the Queen's Guard. The incident would be documented and reported through proper military channels, but it would not define or diminish his service record. Meanwhile, the viral spread of the incident was reaching international proportions. News outlets across Britain picked up the story, with television reports showing the footage alongside interviews with royal historians and military experts who explained the significance of the Queen's Guard and the seriousness of Marcus's actions. The Daily Mail ran the story with the headline "Drunk Yob Assaults Queen's Guard in Shocking Palace Attack," while The Guardian took a more measured approach with "Tourist Charged After Incident with Royal Guard Highlights Security Concerns." The BBC included the story in their evening news broadcast, using it as a starting point for a broader discussion about respect for military traditions and the challenges faced by ceremonial guards dealing with increasingly aggressive tourist behavior. Social media reactions were swift and polarized. Many users expressed outrage at Marcus's behavior, calling for severe punishment and praising the guard's restraint. Others used the incident to criticize British class structures and tourist behavior more generally. The hashtag #RespectTheGuards began trending as military veterans and supporters shared their own stories and opinions about the incident. Marcus's family in Manchester remained unaware of the unfolding situation until his brother David received a phone call from a local newspaper reporter asking for comment on the viral video. David Thompson, a teacher at a local secondary school, was horrified to learn that his brother had become the center of an international news story for all the wrong reasons. "There must be some mistake," David told the reporter before hanging up and immediately searching online for the videos that had already been viewed millions of times. Seeing his brother's face clearly visible in the footage, hurling food at a soldier and shouting abuse, filled David with a mixture of shock, disappointment, and protective concern that would characterize his family's response throughout the ordeal. David immediately called their mother, Margaret Thompson, to break the news before she heard it from another source. Margaret was at home recovering from her latest round of chemotherapy treatments, and the shock of learning about Marcus's arrest and international notoriety was almost more than her weakened system could handle. "Oh, Marcus," she whispered into the phone, her voice carrying the weight of a mother's unconditional love mixed with profound disappointment. "What has he done to himself?" The Thompson family's working-class roots had always emphasized respect for authority, military service, and proper behavior in public. Marcus's father, who had died 3 years earlier, had been a Royal Navy veteran who would have been mortified by his son's treatment of a fellow serviceman. The family's shame was compounded by their awareness that Marcus's actions would be seen as a reflection of their values and upbringing. As the night wore on, Marcus remained in custody at Belgravia police station, slowly sobering up and gradually comprehending the magnitude of his situation. The duty solicitor who had been assigned to his case, Jennifer Walsh, arrived in the early hours of the morning to meet with her new client and assess the legal challenges ahead. Walsh was an experienced criminal defense attorney who specialized in public order offenses, but even she was struck by the unusual circumstances of Marcus's case. The extensive video evidence, the international media attention, and the symbolic nature of his target made this a particularly complex matter that would require careful handling. "Mr. Thompson, I need you to understand that this situation is quite serious," Walsh explained during their first consultation. "The charges you're facing carry potential prison sentences, and the public attention means that the prosecution will likely pursue this case vigorously." Marcus sat in the interview room wearing a custody suit, his hair disheveled and his eyes red from alcohol and exhaustion. For the first time since leaving the Red Lion pub, he was beginning to think clearly about what he had done and what it might cost him. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," Marcus said quietly. "I was celebrating, I was drunk, I made a terrible mistake. That soldier didn't deserve what I did to him." Walsh nodded, recognizing both the genuine remorse in her client's voice and the legal challenges that lay ahead. Marcus's acknowledgement of wrongdoing would be helpful in eventual plea negotiations, but it couldn't undo the damage that had already been done to his reputation and future prospects. The morning would bring new challenges as Marcus faced his first court appearance, but for now he could only sit in his cell and contemplate how quickly a life could be transformed by a few moments of poor judgment fueled by alcohol and personal pain. Westminster Magistrates' Court was buzzing with unusual activity when Marcus Thompson arrived for his first appearance the following morning. News vans lined the street outside, their satellite dishes pointing skyward like metallic flowers seeking signal strength. Reporters from newspapers, television stations, and online publications had gathered in unprecedented numbers for what would normally be a routine drunk and disorderly hearing. Marcus sat in the defendant's dock wearing the same clothes he had been arrested in, now wrinkled and stained from his night in custody. The harsh fluorescent lighting of the courtroom made him appear pale and fragile, a stark contrast to the aggressive man captured in the viral videos that had now been viewed tens of millions of times across various platforms. District Judge Helen Morrison presided over the proceedings with the measured authority that came from 20 years of dealing with London's most challenging cases. She had already reviewed the extensive video evidence and police reports, understanding that this case had implications far beyond the typical public order offense that filled her daily docket. "Mr. Thompson, you are charged with drunk and disorderly conduct, assault on a member of Her Majesty's Armed Forces, and criminal damage to military property," Judge Morrison announced, her voice carrying clearly through the packed courtroom. "How do you plead to these charges?" Jennifer Walsh, Marcus's solicitor, rose to address the court. She had spent the early morning hours reviewing the case files and developing a strategy that acknowledged her client's guilt while attempting to mitigate the potential consequences of his actions. "Your Honor, my client pleads guilty to all charges," Walsh announced, a decision that sent murmurs through the packed gallery. "Mr. Thompson wishes to express his sincere remorse for his actions and his deep respect for the military service represented by the Queen's Guard." The guilty plea was strategic, demonstrating accountability while hoping to secure more lenient sentencing. But Judge Morrison's expression suggested that the case's high profile would make standard sentencing guidelines insufficient for addressing the broader implications of Marcus's behavior. Prosecutor James Hartwell represented the Crown Prosecution Service in pursuing the charges against Marcus. Hartwell was known for his thorough preparation and his ability to articulate the public interest in prosecuting cases that had broader social significance beyond their immediate criminal elements. "Your Honor, this case represents far more than a simple incident of drunk and disorderly conduct," Hartwell argued during his opening statement. The defendant deliberately targeted a member of the Queen's Guard, an institution that represents centuries of military tradition and service to the Crown. His actions were recorded and broadcast worldwide, damaging Britain's reputation and undermining respect for our military traditions. Meanwhile, the viral nature of Marcus's incident had created a global conversation about respect, tradition, and accountability. The videos had been shared across every major social media platform, generating millions of comments, reactions, and derivative content that kept the story trending for days after the initial incident. On Twitter, the hashtag Buckingham Palace incident generated polarized responses. Military veterans and supporters of traditional institutions expressed outrage at Marcus's behavior, sharing stories of their own service and emphasizing the discipline required to maintain ceremonial duties. Others criticized what they saw as excessive punishment for what amounted to drunken stupidity, arguing that the incident was being blown out of proportion by media attention. Dr. Emily Richardson, a professor of military history at King's College London, was among the experts interviewed by various news outlets about the significance of the Queen's Guard and the seriousness of Marcus's actions. Her analysis provided important context for international audiences who might not fully understand the traditions he had violated. The Queen's Guard represents an unbroken chain of military service dating back centuries, Dr. Richardson explained during a BBC interview. These are not ceremonial soldiers playing dress-up for tourists. They are active duty members of elite military regiments who have earned their positions through exceptional service. To assault one of them is to assault the institution they represent and the values they embody. The international reach of the story was remarkable in its scope and speed. American news networks picked up the footage, using it to discuss British traditions and military customs that many American viewers found fascinating. European media outlets covered the story as an example of declining respect for authority and tradition. Asian news organizations focused on the role of social media in amplifying individual moments of poor judgment into global controversies. Marcus's construction company, Meridian Building Solutions, found itself unwillingly thrust into the spotlight as reporters sought background information about their now famous employee. Company director Robert Hayes held an emergency board meeting to discuss the situation and its potential impact on their business reputation. "We are deeply disappointed and embarrassed by Mr. Thompson's behavior," Hayes announced in a prepared statement released to the media. "His actions do not represent the values of our company or our workforce. We are conducting a full review of his employment status in light of these serious charges." The statement was carefully worded to distance the company from Marcus's actions while avoiding immediate termination that might complicate legal proceedings. But Hayes privately knew that Marcus's employment was effectively over, regardless of the court's eventual decision. No construction company could afford to be associated with someone who had become a symbol of disrespect for British institutions. The impact on Marcus's family was devastating and immediate. His mother Margaret received dozens of phone calls from reporters seeking interviews and background information. Her neighbors in their Manchester council estate were similarly contacted, with some expressing support for the family while others distanced themselves from the controversy. Margaret's cancer treatment had already left her physically and emotionally fragile, and the stress of her son's international notoriety threatened to undermine her recovery. Her oncologist, Dr. Patricia Chen, expressed serious concerns about the impact of the situation on Margaret's immune system and overall health. "Stress can significantly compromise cancer treatment outcomes," Dr. Chen explained to Marcus's brother David. "Your mother needs to focus on her recovery, not on media attention and legal proceedings. The family might want to consider hiring a public relations professional to manage the situation." David Thompson faced his own challenges as reporters approached his school seeking interviews about his brother's behavior. The headmaster, concerned about the disruption to the educational environment, suggested that David might want to take temporary leave until the media attention subsided. "I understand this is a difficult situation for your family," Headmaster Williams explained during their private meeting. "But we need to consider the impact on our students and their learning environment. The media presence is becoming disruptive, and some parents have expressed concerns." The suggestion felt like punishment for his brother's actions, but David understood the school's position. He agreed to take compassionate leave while the family dealt with the crisis, another casualty of Marcus's moment of poor judgment that continued to ripple outward like stones thrown into still water. Back in London, Lance Corporal Mitchell found himself dealing with unexpected attention from his fellow soldiers and military leadership. While his professional handling of the incident had been exemplary, the viral nature of the videos meant that his face was now recognizable to millions of people worldwide. Major Davies called Mitchell into her office to discuss the situation and its potential impact on his military career. The attention was unusual for someone in his position, and the military needed to consider how to protect his privacy while managing the public relations aspects of the incident. "How are you handling the attention, Lance Corporal?" Davies asked, her concern evident despite the formal military setting. "It's strange to think that people around the world have seen me doing my job, ma'am," Mitchell replied honestly. "But I'm proud of how I represented the regiment and the Queen's Guard. If anything, I hope this incident helps people understand what we do and why it matters." Davies was impressed by Mitchell's maturity and perspective. Many soldiers would have been overwhelmed by the sudden fame, but Mitchell seemed to understand both the responsibility that came with his visibility and the opportunity it provided to educate the public about military service. The military's response to the incident was measured but firm. A statement released by the Ministry of Defense praised the professionalism shown by the Queen's Guard while condemning the assault on military personnel and property. The statement emphasized that such incidents would be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Social media analysis revealed fascinating patterns in how the story spread and evolved across different platforms. TikTok users created countless reaction videos, often focusing on the Guard's discipline and restraint. Instagram saw the emergence of tribute posts honoring military service and traditional institutions. Facebook generated lengthy discussions about respect, accountability, and the role of alcohol in poor decision-making. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a digital communications researcher at Oxford University, studied the viral spread of Marcus's incident as part of her ongoing research into how individual moments become global conversations through social media amplification. This case demonstrates how quickly and comprehensively social media can transform a local incident into an international discussion, Dr. Martinez observed. Within hours, millions of people around the world were forming opinions about British military traditions, tourist behavior, and personal accountability based on a few minutes of video footage. The psychological impact on Marcus was becoming more apparent as the reality of his situation settled in. The duty psychiatrist at Belgravia police station had noted signs of depression and anxiety that extended beyond the immediate stress of criminal charges. Marcus's underlying issues with alcohol, relationship failure, and family pressure had created a perfect storm that led to his moment of public disgrace. Dr. Amanda Foster, a forensic psychologist who would later evaluate Marcus for sentencing purposes, recognized the complex factors that had contributed to his behavior. Her preliminary assessment suggested that while Marcus was clearly responsible for his actions, there were underlying mental health and substance abuse issues that needed to be addressed as part of any effective intervention. As the court proceedings continued, it became clear that Marcus's case had transcended its origins as a simple criminal matter. The global attention had transformed it into a symbol of broader social issues including respect for authority, the consequences of social media amplification, and the destructive potential of alcohol abuse combined with personal crisis. Judge Morrison understood that her eventual sentence would be scrutinized not just by legal professionals but by millions of people around the world who had formed opinions about Marcus's behavior and its appropriate consequences. The challenge would be crafting a response that satisfied the demands of justice while addressing the educational and rehabilitative needs that the case had revealed. Marcus sat in the dock, overwhelmed by the magnitude of attention his few moments of drunken stupidity had generated. The man who had simply wanted to celebrate a professional achievement had become a global symbol of disrespect and poor judgment, facing consequences that extended far beyond anything the criminal justice system could impose. 3 weeks after his arrest, Marcus Thompson sat in the sparse waiting room of the Camden Community Mental Health Center, staring at his hands and trying to process how dramatically his life had changed. The court had ordered psychological evaluation as part of the pre-sentencing process, and Dr. Amanda Foster had become the latest professional attempting to understand the man behind the viral video that had made him internationally infamous. The weight loss was noticeable even to casual observers. Marcus had dropped nearly 2 stone since his arrest, the result of stress, depression, and an almost complete loss of appetite that worried his family and legal team. His construction job was officially terminated the day after his court appearance, and his landlord had served him with an eviction notice after reporters began camping outside his London flat. "Tell me about the night of the incident, Marcus," Dr. Foster encouraged during their third session. She was a specialist in forensic psychology who had worked with hundreds of defendants, but Marcus's case was unique in her experience due to the global attention and the complete absence of any prior criminal behavior. "I keep trying to understand how I became that person," Marcus replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've seen the videos hundreds of times now. I watch myself throwing that sandwich and I can't believe that's actually me. It's like watching a stranger destroy my life." Dr. Foster made notes as Marcus spoke, recognizing the genuine distress in his voice. Her preliminary assessment had identified several contributing factors to his behavior: alcohol dependency, unprocessed grief over his father's death, relationship trauma, financial stress, and underlying depression that had been masked by professional success until recent setbacks overwhelmed his coping mechanisms. The international media attention had created additional psychological pressure that few defendants ever experienced. Marcus couldn't leave his temporary accommodation without risking recognition and confrontation. Social media had become a nightmare landscape of comments, memes, and discussions about his character and future that felt like being dissected while still alive. His brother David had moved to London temporarily to provide support and manage the practical aspects of Marcus's life that had become impossible for him to handle alone. David found himself serving as unofficial spokesman for the family, deflecting media requests while trying to maintain his own teaching career and support his cancer-stricken mother. "The hardest part is seeing how this has affected Mom," David confided to his girlfriend Rachel during one of their late-night phone conversations. "She's fighting cancer and should be focusing on getting better, but instead she's dealing with reporters and neighbors asking about Marcus. Some people have been supportive, but others have been cruel." Margaret Thompson had indeed become a secondary victim of her son's viral moment. Neighbors in their Manchester council estate had mixed reactions to the situation, with some offering support while others gossiped about the family's shame. The stress was measurably impacting her cancer treatment, with Dr. Chen reporting concerning changes in her blood work that correlated with the emotional trauma. The financial implications were becoming clearer as well. Marcus's unemployment meant he couldn't meet his rent obligations, and his legal fees were mounting despite having a court-appointed solicitor for the criminal proceedings. The civil implications were also emerging, with suggestions that he might face claims for damage to the military uniform and potential compensation demands. Jennifer Walsh, his solicitor, had been working tire.